All right, The Search. We've been in a 3-week series, and we're concluding it today with The Search for Activity. And we're going to start today with 2 questions that I want you to mull over in your head for a second. And the first one is this: what wouldn't you do if you knew it would gain you acceptance? What wouldn't you do if you knew it would gain you acceptance? Think about that for just a second. Are there things in your life that no matter what would happen, if it gained you acceptance, would you be all about that? That's the first question. Second question: what wouldn't you do if you know you could never lose acceptance? As we're thinking about these 2 questions, at the heart of it is, what activities would I be involved in that I'd be willing to do no matter what if it gained me acceptance and I could never lose acceptance? I always had a place. Always belonged. What activity would I do? We're all searching for things in our life that we can do that will give us a place of belonging, a place of acceptance. And here's the point I want to make with this. If you fear rejection of others, you'll conform to the expectation of others. Fear the rejection of others, you'll conform to the expectation of others. So many of us spend so much time searching, trying to do activities to fit in and belong, that we end up putting ourselves in this place of where everybody else's opinion matters. And I brought this handy little hammer that is going to act as an imaginary gavel today. So imagine me being the judge, and I get to hit this on your pronouncement in your sentence, right? Now, the interesting thing is, every one of us has a gavel in our life, and yet we hand it over to other people, right? We let other people be the judge of us. Too many people in our world go around and just say, here, you can be my judge. You know, when I was younger, all of my teachers, I would hand them a gavel. And whether they thought my behavior in class was acceptable or not determined whether I felt good about myself that day or not. As I got older, I got kind of bitter towards that, and I took the gavel back, but not in an appropriate way. It became this point where my educational grade didn't matter as much, but the gavel then became about being a rebellious person, and I started hanging out with the kids who were a little bit more rebellious. So what was important to them? Phil, are you like us? Do you wear the right clothes? Boom. Do you say the right words? Boom. Do you hang out with the right group? Boom. Do you make fun of the right people? Boom. And it was interesting to me that in this experience, we basically, as human beings, take this thing in our own life, turn it over and say, you can be the judge of me. And what is acceptable to you is what I'm going to do. The activities that are important to you are the things I'm going to hand over. The problem with this is if you believe that other people get to be the judge, there's a place where you are underbelieving the gospel. You're underbelieving the truth of Jesus. And in fact, you know, there's a book called Boundaries by Henry Cloud where he specifically talks about not letting people be your judge and taking the gavel back. And when we put the gavel into the wrong hands, or we put them into other people's hands, just in general, it starts to kill us. It starts to hurt us. And it creates this false belief. And that is, I must do the right thing to be approved by the right people to feel good about myself. Okay? A false belief. I must do the right thing to be approved by the right people to feel good about myself. Now, this might seem simple. It might seem something that we can say, no, I can easily reject that. But I guarantee by the end of today, there's going to be multiple places in your life where you look at it, it's like, I still do that. Even if I know better, I still do that. And there are some people who have learned not to give the gavel away. And some of those people, they've learned how to connect with people. They've learned how to care about other people, empathize with them. They've even learned how to be vulnerable, but they're not disrupted or devastated when that person decides to do something negative back, whether that's use harmful words, whether it's to put them down, whether it's to judge them. They get into this place where they just aren't affected by that. They have people's words that come through, and they just decide this isn't how I'm going to be. They are not defined by this judgment. So what does it take for a person to get to that point? Now, some of us have gone about this in an unhealthy way. It's not a rejection of people, meaning I don't need their acceptance, or I don't care about them, or I don't need to care about others, or if I don't care about anyone, and if I don't let anybody close, I can't get hurt, right? That's not healthy. And it's not found in the common lie that's floating around our culture. This one really drives me nuts. I'm the source of my own love, worth, and significance. Say that again. It's not found in this. I'm the source of my own love, worth, and significance. That is a lie our culture tells us. And those people, we might look at those three people and say, okay, they don't care about people, they're not hurt by people, but they've rejected it and they've made themselves the center of their world. That's not how these people get there. These people get to this point by being defined and being in a relationship that's absolutely secure. A relationship that no matter who they are, what they do, they are welcome, they are loved, and they belong. We're going to look at this particularly today because this is the exact definition of the gospel. And the gospel says, not only am I guilty and more sinful than I ever realized, I'm way worse than I could ever imagine, but I'm also more loved and accepted than I could ever believe. That's the truth of the gospel. So maybe you've had doubts and unanswered questions about trusting in Jesus when it comes to his love for us or understanding your acceptance. And you've been one of those people who you're just unsure of where Jesus stands with you. When you hear somebody say, what does this acceptance look like? I'm not sure if I believe it, so I'm going to keep doing my own thing to see where I end up to make sure I have this place. Or you're a believer and you've been for a long time and you know this about Jesus and that you keep finding yourself back at the same place where you're back into trying to earn his love through your activities, through your behaviors. Well, today we get to look at the New Testament answer to approval addiction. Right? Many of us have an addiction for approval, and the New Testament has an answer. We're going to look at exactly what this is. Galatians chapter 1, 6 through 10. This is a story in which people know the gospel, but they forget. I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ, and are turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Let's pause for a second. They know who Jesus is, but they're turning to something else, turning to their own behaviors. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion or trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, meaning anything different than what we learned from Jesus, let them be under God's curse. That's some pretty heavy words there. As we have already said, so now I say again, if anybody is preaching to you a gospel other than what you accepted, let him be under God's curse. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please these people, I would not be a servant of Christ. So first thing we're going to look at, what we get from this particular passage, is that there are many things in this world that are contrary to the gospel. Quite often, we'll say religion versus the gospel, where religion is we have to earn our way to Jesus. Here we're hearing Paul say, no. If you're trying to earn your way, that's something other than what Jesus has done, right? And I have to tell you something. Every false gospel I've ever heard of requires you to work for your approval. Every false gospel that I've ever heard of requires you to work for your approval. And following Christ cuts you free of the need for the approval of other people. So in this passage, Paul is writing to a group of people, and he's saying, listen, you've put your faith on pause, all right? You're actually you're no longer seeing Jesus as your Savior. You're seeing yourself as your Savior, and Jesus is just part of it. Even though Jesus has justified them and saved them and paid the price for them, even though he's declared there's no condemnation for those who trust Jesus, they still give the gavel to someone else. And they went back and found that this old gavel of theirs and said, even though Jesus has saved me and the judgment is taken care of, he's paying the price for me, I'm going to hand this back over to you people to decide whether I'm worthy or not. To decide whether I have actually met the standard of what is supposed to be going on here. Now, the context is that there was someone that claimed that an angel appeared to them when he's speaking to these people. a person had claimed an angel had appeared to him and gave them kind of this distorted gospel. Whereas even though Jesus did this, it's not enough. You now have to do this. This is what was happening in the church in Galatians here. So some people were confused because they undervalued and underbelieved what Jesus had said in the first place. And that is, the price is paid. So in the context, Paul is saying this: even though there are many things in this world that you think you can use to earn my love, when he's referring to God's love for us, you're missing the picture whenever you put your salvation back in your own hands. When you put your judgment and your worthiness into the hands of other people, you've missed the point of the gospel. And it's interesting that I like to say this quite often, that it doesn't really matter what church you go to, whether it's Methodist, Lutheran, Baptist, Mennonite Brethren, non-denominational. It doesn't matter. Religion finds its way back into every church. Every experience. Even as believers, we find ourselves in this place where all of a sudden we're sitting here, I haven't prayed enough, I haven't read my Bible enough, I haven't served enough, or I'm not doing enough Bible study, and all of a sudden we're back in this place of saying, I'm not good enough because there's been some leader in my life that says this is what acceptance to Jesus is. You have to do all these things. Right? We all find ourselves back in this place. Now, as somebody looking from the outside in, if I was to look at that, I would say, like, if it's all about doing, how is this place any different? And that's where Jesus steps up and has a completely different experience for us. The gospel solution is reconciliation. So the biggest difference is this reconciliation piece. When we're searching for activity, when we're searching for things that we have to do, we have to understand that there is a complete healing of a broken relationship. Robert S. McGee puts it this way: reconciliation means that although at one time I was hostile and alienated from God, I now have been forgiven and brought into an intimate relationship with God. Consequently, I like that word, consequently, I am totally accepted by God. There's a big difference here. When we look at these different gospels, we look at these different experiences, and we fall back into a place where we think we can earn it, forget that Jesus has paid the price. We forget that the reconciliation has happened. We forget that no matter what I do, no matter what things I make a mistake in, the price is paid. We're going to look at Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 through 14 to get a better picture at this, and we're actually going to break it down a little bit. Not particularly word by word, but a few times. So it starts off with therefore, okay? Whenever you see a therefore, you have to ask yourself, what is it there for? Right? The therefore is referring back to verse 1, where it says, since you have been raised with Christ, you have a new life because the old one is gone, is died. Following that, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved. Pause for a second on that. Before you think about what comes next, before you gear up trying to apply this or rejecting it, you have to consider this. If you have switched your allegiance to Jesus, you are chosen by God, considered holy by God, and dearly loved by God. Let that sink in for a moment. The same Creator God who initiated, if you're in that world, the Big Bang, who created the rainbows, who created all the plants and animals, who put the water into motion, created the earth, created all the idiosyncrasies of each human being, even the most famous duck-billed platypus. Right? The same Creator God chose you. He pursues you. And it's not passively either. He literally moved mountains to get to you. When it says, God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, God is after you. He considers you holy by what He's done, not on your earning. He granted you an innocent verdict, right? Back to the gavel. Because of Jesus, He granted you an innocent verdict at expense of Himself. When you pause and think about that, this is a God who's chosen you, who's made you holy. Why? Because you are dearly loved. And what that means to you is that every single one of us who's turned to Jesus, our past sins, all the mistakes we've made, the present ones we've made today, and the ones we're going to commit in the future have all been paid for. He has set his affections on you. God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved. In fact, when it comes to why do we do church, why do we sing praises, why do we acknowledge God and worship him, it's because of this. Because we are his chosen people, holy and dearly loved, because he paid a price for us, because he pursues us, no matter how ridiculous we are. Right? If it was based on what we did, we couldn't do enough. So our response, the following verses are our response. When you look at Christianity and you see, well, it does appear to be religious, well, yeah, because there's practices of us pursuing God because we get to acknowledge what he's done for us. So it looks like this. Clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you have grievances against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. We have to take a moment and look at that. This is what we've been called to do. Clothe ourselves in compassion, kindness, humility, and gentleness, and patience. Put on love, forgiving as Christ has forgiven us. Now, I have to tell you, our culture is starved of this. As much as we think we have it, it is starved of this. And everything we do for others is based on what he has done for us and is doing in us. So rereading Colossians 3, verses 12 and 14, these are the two, our response to the gospel. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And over all these, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. So sometimes I've spent time in my life looking at my faith, looking at other people's faith, and I'll ask the question, if Jesus has paid the price for everything, can I just go live however I want? Can I just go do whatever I want? Can I just continue to sin because it's paid for? I've made a decision to follow Jesus, but now, since he's paid the price, I can live however I want. Behave poorly, live in sin. I think some of us will ask that question. But the problem with that question is it's built on what you are doing. Again, it's built on your worthiness or your righteousness, your religion, whether you're climbing the ladder or not. Well, if the ladder doesn't matter, then I can do whatever. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. Our response to the gospel is to understand what has happened for us, to us, and been paid for. I guess if you were to put it in this terms, if you were with a friend and they did something really, really nice for you, like exceptionally nice, can't even put it into words, is your response to be mean to them or to be thankful and grateful? It'd be to be thankful and grateful. So when people ask the question of like, if I can I just do whatever I want? My question is, well, who is God to you? Because if he's just some abstract being in the sky who has no relationship with you, then you're looking at your life on what am I allowed to do or what am I not allowed to do based on my righteousness and level of getting into heaven. Versus looking at a God who wants a relationship with you, wants to be a part of your life, wants to be involved in your life, loves you deeply, and wants you to learn how to love him back. You guys see the difference? It's pretty significant. We're going to look at these 4 points that he brought up here, that Paul brings up. Clothe yourselves, first of all, in compassion. Deeply feel for people in need. You ever hear the question of like, why would a loving God not do anything for hurting people around the world? Right? There are these people hurting overseas. They're starving. They're struggling. There are homeless people downtown. Why is a loving God doing nothing? Well, God is doing something. He made you. And he's giving you compassion to do something about it. Right? one of the tests to decide if God is working inside you is whether you have compassion or not for painful things. If you feel numb, if you feel like there's this bad thing that happens but it doesn't touch you at all, then you're kind of blocking what God wants to do in you. If you have a Jesus-like heart, it's not one that's stoic, it's one that's in touch with the world around you. It's one that's in touch with the hurts of our society, the hurts of our world, the hurts of the human existence. And you care about that. Now, I'm not saying that you have to be completely overly emotional, but you certainly have to understand that your emotions are sometimes God's way of touching on your heart to be compassionate for the world around you. A response to the gospel is compassion. Are there people in our world right now that are hurting? Is there a neighbor in your life that is hurting? Is there a family member in your life that is hurting? Compassion says deeply feel for people in need. Kindness. Readiness to do good for others. It's like compassion, but it's the action piece of this, right? There's an added action. It's feeling appropriately married to the decision of compassion. There are some of us that when we have this compassion, we have this desire, we just think about it and we move on. Kindness is taking that compassion and doing something with it. If you have a heart for the homeless, if you have a heart for widows and orphans, if you have a heart for just your neighbor, you think about them, kindness would lead you to do something. It's nice to talk about it, but sometimes we have to take the next step. For some people in this room, it might mean down the road a missions trip to a foreign country. It might mean serving in children's ministry. It might mean walking across the street and having a conversation. Or it might mean pulling over on the side of the road and helping somebody change a tire. Like, there are plenty of times in my life I've had compassion on people with a flat tire, but not kindness, as I drove right by. So I've had those moments. But kindness is challenging yourself to get out and do something. Kindness, according to John MacArthur, is the virtue that mellows the harshness in us. Right? Really pulls out that selfishness, which leads us to humility, which would be placing your life below others. This is an interesting piece. We today look at humility as it's like very available in society, and we assume that we have it, like somehow humanity evolved into humility. Let me explain something to you. Before Jesus, humility was not a virtue in any society at all. It didn't exist. We as human beings do not evolve into humility. It's not natural. In fact, the exact opposite would be survival of the fittest. Right? In survival of the fittest, is there room for humility? No, because the humble get squashed. Placing your life below others. This is something that has come about because of the price Jesus paid on the cross. Next one, gentleness. Helping people in such a way that they don't feel condemned. Another John MacArthur statement, he describes gentleness as a willingness to suffer injury instead of inflicting it. This is a hard one. So many of us in our life have the opportunity to give feedback. We have somebody who comes into our life and they might be damaging themselves and we want to help them, and the words we choose end up pushing them further down. How I think is important to communicate is with both truth and grace. Right? Maybe there's somebody in your life who needs to hear the truth. Well, that may be true, but can you do it with grace? And that's a tricky piece. I'm learning that. As I had these interns here this summer, I had to figure out, how do I tell them the truth about where they could improve in a gracious way that they don't feel I'm stomping them into the ground. Now, I certainly could. I was their boss, and I'm paying them, so they have to do what I say, right? But at the same time, if I care about who they are, if I have compassion, kindness, humility, and gentleness, my goal is not to squish them because of a job failed. My goal is to take that failure and help them learn from it. So it becomes a win instead of a loss. How do we make them into a better person? By the feedback we give. In fact, when Jesus shares multiple times in the New Testament, he always does it out of compassion and gentleness. The only time I see Jesus not being gentle is when he's talking to religious people. When they're coming at him with the I am righteous kind of statements, that's where Jesus says, you got it wrong. But every other person he talks to that's not religious, a religious leader, he is always gentle, trying to give them both grace and truth. You know, there's a piece of this that is important for us to understand. The last one, patience. I love this one. It's really hard, really hard. Choosing to go at another person's speed. Boy. We have the blessing of having my nephew and niece over this weekend, and my niece, sweetest thing can be, but she is a very slow eater. And we have a rule at our house that you don't get to leave the table till everyone's done. Unfortunately, I broke that rule multiple times this weekend. But she's such a slow eater. And if anybody's been there, that's a simple one, right? We're not talking like they've cut us deeply or they said something really harsh, or they're causing us to lose a piece of life in this world. We're just having to wait for her to eat longer. But that one's hard. Choosing to go at another one's speed. Patience is a lack of anger when dealing with the inconvenience brought on by others. Let me say that again. Patience is a lack of anger when dealing with inconvenience brought on by others. These qualities were lived out by Jesus' followers. As we're searching for activity, as we're looking at judgment, the only judgment that matters is the judge who pronounced us innocent. The only relationship, the only activity that matters is the ones that Jesus really cares about. Where Jesus wants us to represent him to the world. Where Jesus wants us to know we are forgiven. When Jesus wants to know the price has been paid. When Paul confronts us for saying, listen, you have Jesus, why are you going back to your own strength and your own salvation? You're not in charge. When we see Jesus step in like this, he really did in the early church. In fact, like I said with humility, it wasn't part of society. Most of these things were not. In fact, I've got a quote here from Lucian, who would have been considered like the late night show talk host, this kind of satirist guy of the early Roman Empire when the Christians first came about. And this is what he said. The activity of these people, referring to Christians, in dealing with any matter that affects their community is something extraordinary. They spare no trouble, no expense. You see, I like this, these misguided creatures start with the general conviction that they are immortal for all time, which explains the contempt of death and voluntary, here we go, self-devotion, which are so common among them. And then it was impressed on them by their original lawgiver that they are all brothers from the moment they are converted and deny the gods of Greece and worship the crucified sage and live after his laws. They're looking at these people and saying, what is with them? What is with these people? They weren't normal. Early Christians were different. You know what? The reality for us is if we're religious and we're trapped in religion, we're no different. But if we understand the freedom of the gospel, that changes things dramatically. As I wrap up, I'm going to invite the band up for one last song. But what the gospel should mean to us is that we didn't evolve into good people. We naturally don't have the ability to be people who love, who care, who are compassionate without Jesus. We can do things, but we do it because it makes us feel good. But when the feelings are gone, so is our action. The beautiful thing about responding to the gospel, responding to Jesus, is that it doesn't really matter how we feel. We know who we are. We don't need someone else in this room to accept us. We don't have to fear rejection because we know we're accepted. As we're closing up this week, this 3-week series, just looking back, we covered identity. we are on the inside, what really matters. And we can respond to that by saying, I find delight in defining myself by what Jesus did for me, not in what I do. The first steps of understanding who Jesus is. What he did, not what I do. Then we looked at transcendence. We looked at searching for these moments that are absolutely special or wonderful, where there's something that's out of mind, out of body, where God steps in and grabs a hold of our life. We get to experience that when we submit to what Jesus says for us. We get to understand that God is trying to work through us. Today, I find delight in doing for others what Jesus has done for me. So the bottom line for this series, as we wrap up the search, is don't live your life to please others. Live your life to love others. I'm going to pray, but after we sing this song, if you would like prayer, there'll be somebody up here at the front corner to pray with you today. But let's go ahead and close. Jesus, I thank you for this series of us searching, God, as we search for something. I pray that it's you. Help us take the gavel back from all the people we give it to, where we're searching for acceptance, when in reality we only need it from you, Lord. Guide us to what means most in this life, love and acceptance from our God, from our Creator.